Yell at me or say I'm.
For this part, I don't think Dutch requires much introduction, so he's going to start tying a fly tonight that he designed over the last few weeks.
Couple months.
It's been 2 months that he fished up in Missoula this year.
Yeah.
That's all your.
Thank you, thank you. Well, first, thank you all for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. It's good to still be able to go places. And it's always a pleasure to come and participate in this at my own club. Tonight, for this session, we're going to take a look at 2 flies. The first one you have a paper on. Did everybody get a paper? A handout? There you go.
Thank you.
Everybody behind me have one? Okay. I was looking for a fly that would do well on Montana trout and on local largemouth bass. And so I wanted something that would, as you can see in this handout here, I wanted a fly that would float well, that would be highly visible. When we have to remember as fly tiers, when we are looking at a fly in our vices, that's not at all how we're going to see it when it's in the water. And I don't mean from a point of view of floating or not floating, but if there's any kind of surface disturbance at all, a lot of flies disappear, especially late in the afternoon. There's typically some glare, and so having a fly that's highly visible and rides high is going to be. Rex, make sure you get one of these.
I can't slip in the back. I noticed.
Yeah, no, I'm going to call on you a few times here, Rex. Count on that. But you can see in this handout that there were some specific things I was looking for, and I'll right up front I'll tell you that this pattern really follows in line with the Charlie Craven school of thought, and that is that Charlie has tested foam bugs a lot and determined that a fly will float better if it has a broader footprint or more displacement than to be stacked high. So flies like the chubby Chernobyl, the fat Albert, Walter Walker, those kind of flies that have layers and layers, maybe 3 or 4 layers of foam, they look nice to the angler in the box in the fly shop, but they're not necessarily practical in the water. So I wanted something that would be very buoyant. And one thing I learned from this, building this fly, was that one of the early versions, I wanted to tie the legs on this fly like our friend Mike Verdine did on the cap spider. You all remember how he did that. It was so beautiful. And we did that on the brim reaper, but that's a subsurface fly, so it works out just fine. But on a floating fly, tying your legs in like the cap spider, in other words, the legs are tied in on the bottom, pointing down toward the hook. And I like to use the brand Perfect rubber legs. They're very, 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 very tough. They're very buoyant. And when those legs were tied in as cap spider legs, it threw the buoyancy and the balance of the fly way out of whack. And so the fly initially would float well, but then it would turn sideways. It would flip over. So I moved the legs to an outrigger style like you see here, tied in high on the foam. And this fly, we were in Montana a couple weeks ago in some pretty good water, pretty rapid water, and it really stayed on top. You could see it all the way, through all the ripples and rapids and everything. So I was very pleased with it, and you'll see when you're building foam flies, typically the foam strip is going to be about as wide as the gape in your hook. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. This one's wider. I intentionally made the foam wider than the hook gape so that it would just have more water displacement, relying on only one level of one layer of foam. So on your second page there, the materials on this one, I use, well, let me ask you, on that fly right there, who can tell me what color thread I used?
Black.
Black? The votes are black?
Because that's what you always use.
Well, these guys know me too well. Every fly I tie is black or white. And that's why, when you look at it, what difference does it make? Now, if I'm tying a chironomid or a midge, like a zebra midge or something that has a thread body, then I will use different colors. There's a few salmon flies I tie that the original patterns call for a red head, so I'll use red thread on those. But otherwise, every fly I tie is white or black. When I started out a long time ago, I used to get all kinds of different colors, and haven't used a colored thread other than red for a very long time, except on midges. Also, I like to tie with a 14-aught or a 16-aught, occasionally 12. And that's really a curse that developed from tying salmon flies. When you tie salmon flies, part of the mantra is no bumps. Every single thread wrap has to mean something. There's a purpose for it. There's no extra wraps. There's no wraps that are on top of the previous wraps. Everything's side by side. So it stays really clean and smooth, elegant looking. So I got used to using a very thin diameter, small diameter thread. And I studied some of the thread tests, breaking strength tests for thread. What I discovered was that the Vivus thread was far and away the strongest. So I could get a 12 or 14-aught Vivus thread, and it would be as strong as a 3-aught something else. So I strictly use Vivus 14, 16-aught. On demonstration purposes, I typically will use mono thread. I like mono thread a lot, and sometimes if I'm using black, I might even use 2-ply floss. And the only reason for that is because I don't want to waste the time in a demonstration with the thread breaking. And when you're working with 14 and 16-aught, there's a little more risk. Typically it doesn't break because it broke from strength. It'll break because it nicks the hook point. You'll also notice you don't see the hook point on this fly. Somewhere along the way, one of the myths that was perpetrated in fly tying was that you have to have the tip of the hook point sticking out. And as a matter of fact, years ago, Barry came to our tying session one Saturday, and he had found, or no, I found these little,
I just named them.
yeah, he named them. I found these little plastic things that ladies buy for their pierced earrings, that they take a pierced earring and stick it in this little plastic thing and put it in their jewelry box, so when they reach in there, it doesn't poke their fingers. Well, I put that on the tip of my flies. When I'm tying a salmon fly, it's much bigger, and I'll put one of those things on that hook point. And let me make sure I'm not going to. Barry appropriately named them the hook condom. On this fly, you'll notice the hook point's not out, and part of the myth on this in fly tying is that you have to leave the hook point out. Well, the truth of the matter is some hooks are built so that they actually have a little bit of a cant on the bend to the point, especially on bass hooks. We see it a lot around here on bass hooks, but otherwise most hooks are made straight so they can bury themselves in the jaws of vice and not be a problem at all. And I tend to do that on a lot of flies just so that I don't have to put the Red Cross sign out on the door when I'm fly tying from sticking my fingers all the time on those hook points. I like to use fire hole sticks. This is a 718 version of the fire hole stick. I like them a lot. I like fire hole sticks a lot. They're made available in Montana, but they're barbless hooks. Very, 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 think about Gamakatsu sharp, then think about fire hole stick. These are every bit, if not sharper, than Gamakatsus. And they have a unique proprietary kind of, if you look at the anatomy of a hook, there's about 9 actual names of different pieces of the anatomy. One of them on the bottom is we know the barb and we know the hook point. And that point between the distance between the barb and the hook point is called the foot. Well, fire hole has a unique foot on their hooks. And so being very, very sharp and having that kind of a foot on them is really proves very, very effective. And I use these on flies. My brim flies are very, very effective. And the flies I used in Montana a couple weeks ago were all on firehole sticks. For this particular fly, it's around size 8 through 12, anywhere in there. If you get much smaller than that, you start to lose the effectiveness of it. But I've noticed even down to, I field tested some 12s, and those little brims just can't stand it. They have to hit it, so it's not too small. I mean, you can go down that small. The tail on this is crystal flash. I like peacock curl on the body. It's almost like catnip for fish. I mean, you got to have some peacock somewhere on your fly. And I tried a lot of different materials for the wing, and I settled on EP fiber for a couple reasons. One, they have a UV quality to them, which helps in that recognition in the glare of the late afternoon. Plus, they have imagine this now, they have a 0% absorbency. So I've field tested some of these using other kinds of materials, even deer hair and elk hair, and nothing held up better than the EP fiber. And like I said, the legs I use are the brand name is called Perfect Legs, and they're very, very strong. They last a long time, and they float well. Jerry, I'll go ahead. You want to pass that around while
I get it. I
Dan?
got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
You bet.
So we're going to start out with a 7/18 hook. And by the way, please, as we're rolling along here, I welcome questions. If there's something I'm doing that doesn't make any sense or whatever, holler, and let's make sure that everything that we're doing is going to be understood. Now, I'm using this mono thread, and one of my basic principles on starting a fly is you hear people, especially beginners, ask, where do you start the fly? Where do you do it's not a jam knot, it's a hitch, it's a jam hitch. So where do you begin the jam hitch? And the appropriate answer is wherever the first element is to be tied in. Especially if you're talking to commercial fly tyers, if you see a pattern that has the first element to tie in is a tail, but the instructions say tie in at the eye, you've just wasted a lot of thread and time to get from the eye to the bend of the hook. So one of the things I go by is wherever the first element is to be tied in, that's where I start the thread. So on this fly, the first thing we'll tie in will be the tail, so we're going to start the jam hitch back here, just in front of the hook point. And you'll notice, typically when you're wrapping thread, keeping about an inch between the bobbin holder and the hook shank is kind of the ideal distance. But whenever I'm laying the thread on a hook shank inside the gape, and here again, this area between the hook point and the bend of the hook is called the throat. If you go from the hook point to the hook shank, that's the gape. So whenever I'm wrapping thread inside the throat, I like to keep the bobbin holder short like this and eliminate some problems that could develop. And because this is mono, I can't snap it off, so we'll just cut it off. As we're going along here, Barry and Jack, you tell me if I forget something, okay? Now, the next thing we'll do is...
Dutch, I'm sure you said it, but what size hook are you using?
This one, Jeff, I'm using an 8 on this one because it's just a little bit bigger. But typically on this fly, I like an 8 or a 10.
Okay, thank you.
You can go smaller. I remember the first time I fished up in around Jackson on the Snake, I asked them what size fly do I need, and they said, well, about a 2 will be fine. And I thought they had me pegged for a beginner. And I said, well, no, I don't want something that big. That's exactly the right fly. So I take 2 strands of crystal flash, double it over, cut it, then I'll double it over one more time to make sure the ends are even. And then I'll just cut it one more time. Now that will be my tail. And the way I like to do this is right in the middle of that material. Well, I'm going to return my thread so that when the thread hangs straight down, it's right at the hook point, right there. And I'm going to put a very thin coat of glue from one of the anatomy points on the hook is called the start of the bend, and that's right here. And if you start to put any kind of tail material, if you put any tail material on a hook shank in the start of the bend, the tail will be tilted down. That's no good. So you don't want to be dressing hook or tails in the start of the bend. Get them tied in there before you get to the start of the bend. Now, if you're tying salmon flies, the tip and tag will be tied in typically on the start of the bend. And that's okay. Now, I put that thin layer of glue, and I like to use, this is Gorilla Glue. I'm not an official team member of Team Gorilla, or I have no endorsement. I like it. It's strong as the dickens. And it's got a brush applicator, and I'll come back to that in a second. Now, when I bring my thread up, my thread's going to be right there. That's my tie-in spot. I'm going to hold it tight. I'm going to wrap thread toward the bend, holding the tail taut until I get to about where the barb would be if it had one. Then I return the thread all the way up to the 3/4 spot. 3/4 spot is about 2 eye lengths behind the eye. And I'll hold the tail out like this, and I'll cut it all at the same time. And one thing I tend to have long tails, and the reason for that is that another myth in fly tying is that the wing and the tail have to be the length of the hook shank. Well, that's sheep dip. If you've ever looked at a natural mayfly, take a look at that and measure it if you want to, but how long is the tail on that bugger compared to its body? At least 2 times. There's something we could get into, and Dan and others from the class can tell you, I may tend to go off on these things sometimes, but I like long wings and legs because of something called biological perspective. We could spend the rest of the evening talking about this, believe me. But as fly tyers, we know we want to dress a fly that's going to imitate the shape and the size and the color of the aquatic insect, right? Size, shape, and color. Well, what some researchers have discovered that in the world of predators of any species, not just fish, the size, shape, and color is what attracts the predator to the prey. And so then you ask the question, what causes the predator to attack? What's the trigger that sends the predator in motion? It's animation, movement. So I like to put a lot of movement on my flies, which means there's large and small. And all that means is, a large animation would be if I cast that fly into the water and just let it sit, the current that's running by that water will move the wing, it'll move the legs, it'll move the tail. That's small animation. But if I cast it, let it sit, and then retrieve it, it's going to have small animation from just sitting there, but every time I retrieve it, that's large animation. And that kind of animation is what really targets a predator on the prey. So I'll use that glue up to about the 3/4 spot. I'll take a piece of foam here, and I'll lay that foam in place right at where my thread is hanging. Right there. I'll capture it on the tip, on the end, and I'll start rolling thread all the way back. When I get back around here, I extend the thread a little bit so I can lift up and look underneath the foam. And I can put one thread wrap right where that tail is tied in. So now I'm in the right spot. I know I'm right where I should be on the tie-in spot in relationship to the tail. Then I'm going to do more close wraps going back to the forward, trying to get some of those foam bumps down a little bit, and for no other reason than it just looks better. And then I'm going to return my thread back to this spot. I turn it this way so I can see from this perspective. I'm going to take about 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of peacock herl, and one constant rule is always prepare your material before you get to the hook shank. Don't put material on the hook shank and then try to improve it. Fix it right before you take it to the hook shank and then tie it in properly and go on. So I'm going to take this peacock herl. I've lined up the tips. I'm going to tie it in right here, capture it, capture those ends, move the thread back to the tie-in spot. Now, the peacock herl is, when it wraps, it's just like your thread. For a right-hand tire, your thread will do a clockwise twist on every single wrap. If you're a left-hand tire, it will do a counterclockwise twist. Well, so will herl. So what I'll do here is I'll take this herl and I'm going to twist it clockwise, making it a cord. So now when this wraps onto the hook shank, that clockwise twist from the wrap will help to secure this and tighten it as I'm wrapping it forward. You'll notice I leave the thread hanging right there at the hook point. I'll leave it right there. Every one of my wraps now going forward, I won't touch that bobbin holder or thread until I'm finished with wrapping the peacock. And I'll wrap it all the way forward, edge to edge, covering up that foam base, going all the way forward, straight over the top.
So you're not passing the thread, you're moving the thread along with it.
Every wrap moves the thread forward.
Yeah.
Yep, and that captures it a little better. If you're using fewer strands, it also will help to cause the barbules that are on the peacock herl themselves to stand out. And that helps to keep that in the proportion that you want it. So, get ready to clean up on aisle 3 right here. Get rid of those tags. Now, being of the nature I am, I wouldn't be able to go on to the next part of this without putting a few more pieces of herl on here and covering up that foam. But I'm not going to take the time to do it, but just know that I would actually pull out 3 more strands, and even though it's 1/4 of an inch, I want to make sure that it's done right and that foam is covered. So now, back to this point, and I'm going to now do something that might look a little bit strange, but I really don't care, because this really secures this material. And I'm looking for a head on this. I fish a lot of skating and waking flies for steelhead. And for this kind of a floating fly, I wanted it to move through the water smoothly. So I wanted to streamline the head on this. Typically we would fold this all the way forward, tie it off at the eye, and then fold it back, and it creates a big hump right there. That creates a wake. So I didn't want that. So what I'm going to do here now is, and by the way, it's good to have a pair of scissors. These are Fisker scissors. I'm not on the pro team of Fisker, but I like the way they cut. They're very, very sharp, very good. They have a good tip on them for as big as they are. And from this knuckle to my finger is about 2 inches. So I'm going to take about 2 inches of this material, and I'm going to advance my thread to the eye. I'm going to lay the butt end of this material on the hook shank, capture it, straighten it. Now, if you ever have a problem where you're tying in material and you say, well, shoot, every time I wrap thread around that material, it slides to the side. You can avoid that completely, because every holding wrap just goes around the material. A tightening wrap is pulling straight up. Now look at it this way. When I put a loop around this material, big loop, if I pull straight up now, that loop is going to go straight down. And that's the idea of the tightening wrap. So I'll get back out here to the eye, take a peek under there so I can see the eye fine. Now what I'm going to do, tightening wraps, that material, it won't move. Straight up, around, straight up, pull straight up. My finger is moving it more than anything. And I put that ramp on there all the way to the foam. I'm going to advance my thread, or my foam, to right where my thread's hanging. Advance, fold the foam over, do a tightening wrap straight up to a couple of those. Fold the foam back. Now I'm going to do 2 segments. One will be right about there. Tight, tight. The other one, and you always slide your thread under the bottom of the fly when you're advancing backwards or forwards. There's some times where you lift it up and go over that way, but most of the time it'll be just like this. I want my second segment to be about the same as the first. That's just a little bit short. So there we go. That's better. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to take my scissors. I'm going to cut this foam off just inside the length of the tail. Trim the corners. Now that's nice and sharp and straight. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is roll it up. So I'm going to advance the thread to the first segment, right there, go upside down, take rubber leg, and these are also, I'll call that in the 2-inch range, a 2-inch section of rubber leg, fold it around the thread, even up the ends, pull it up. Now watch this, I'm going to pull it up so now my rubber leg is up here. Oops. I'm going to pull it up so it's on top, get those ends even. And now what I want to do is I want to tighten that loop of leg straight down. All I have to do is pull on my thread, and I'll do that again. I want to place it right in the middle of that peacock curl. I'm going to do 2 holding wraps, advance my thread all the way up to the eye. Now I'm going to take my rubber legs, lay those forward and split them on either side of the hook eye. See how there's one rubber leg on each side of the eye. Thread around. That's a holding wrap, but now I'm going to tighten it straight up. One more around. Tighten it straight up. And now a few more tightening wraps going straight up. And I want these 2 sections of rubber legs to be right about here. I can move those into place. So on each side. There. See, that's not right, so I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to come back. This next wrap should let it go. There it goes. So I'll bring this up on the far side. Hold it, tighten it, get it in position.
Hey guys, everybody on the Zoom call, I've muted everybody, so if you want to ask a question, you're going to need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Next step, I'm going to take my glue. I'm going to place a little bit of glue on the front side of the foam right there. And I'm going to allow my bristles from my glue to rake down like that. Be careful not to get your glue onto your rubber legs. By the way, y'all probably know this, but anything you have that's got a bristle, a brush like this, when you get them, take it out of the container, whatever's in it, wipe it off, and cut off about 1/2 to 2/3 of those bristles. Now, if I wanted to make a drop of this, it's much smaller, it's much better contained, and works well. Advance my thread to the first body segment. Lay the wing over the top and tight with 3 securing wraps, right, oh, shoot. I said I like to use mono because it won't break. Typically, on something like this, here's a teaching point. When your thread breaks like that, this mono holds pretty good. And I'll typically come up here with a heavy hackle plier and hold that tag end in place.
Dutch, I think that's a wing fiber, not the mono.
It's what?
That's a wing fiber, not the mono.
Wing, I can't tell.
The mono's still up above.
Oh, he's right.
Yep, thanks, Barry, you're exactly right. I want to capture that. I want to capture that
I'm
thread
sitting next to him.
and let the heavy hackle plier hold that in place. And take another section of thread. I'm going to do a jam hitch. Now this is 14/0, so I can snap that. Now, when I say heavy hackle plier, that's a heavy hackle plier. That is not. So, all right. I'm going to take one more rubber leg. Oh, and you can also, if you want to, you can press from the top of this EP fiber, press it down just a little bit, and it'll grab that glue underneath there just to close up the space. I'm going to take the same kind of technique, the rubber leg around the thread, measure up the tips, come up here to the tie-in spot right there where I want it, and a tightening wrap on this one's going to go away. One more rubber leg. And measure, make sure the tips are lined up. Bring it over the top, tie it in. Slide it down, right where I want it. Right about there, one more tightening wrap. Slide it in place. All right, that's going to be good. Now I'm going to take the front rubber and pull them both out together at the same time. Make them just a little bit shorter. How much shorter? About that much shorter. And now, to do the whip finish, as you're doing a whip finish, one thing to look for is whether you're doing your fingers or a tool, capture the thread, do the whip finish. Now you see that knot that is formed right there with the upside down 4, right where my finger's pointing, that little knot right there. All I care about is placing that knot exactly where I want it to be, right there. I don't have to worry about the legs getting in the way, nothing else. Let me do that again. So I'm going to do, right where that knot's formed, I just want to slide that up and put the knot right where I want the whip finish to be. And by the way, a whip finish is a knot. So that means, what did we learn about those, Dan? What do we know about a knot? We close them and set them. So after we close that knot, we can pull on it just a little bit, and sometimes you can actually feel it'll snug up a little bit, but that's up a little high. That's better. And when you cut thread to finish, you never do this. You never open and close. Just run the thread in there and push the V of the scissors into the thread. The last thing I'll do is come up here and I want to cut this wing off right about the length of the tip of the tail, right about there. And remember when I said you want to avoid getting glue on your legs, on your rubber legs? That's what happened to this first one, this front rubber leg. When I was talking and looking at you guys, and I wasn't paying, and a little piece of glue got onto that. Well, look what happens. it'll grab it and tighten it up like that, distort it completely. So look at it from the side. See how that's all twisted? Okay, so when I get home, what's gonna happen to this one, Jack?
Razor blade.
Razor blade, that one's done. What questions do you have on the stone hopper? Anything?
That's a nice looking fly.
Have you tied it another color, Doug?
No, I haven't, Jim. Well, I shouldn't say that. When I was developing the fly and field testing it, I tried a few different shades of foam, but I just settled on the yellow. Because one of my guiding principles in this was to have something that I can see at high visibility. And it just seemed to me like I could see the yellow better. Anything else on the stone hopper?
I have a question about the fly itself, not
Yes,
so
sir.
much the tying, because I'm new to this.
Uh-huh.
I don't understand how this fly can attract two very different species of fish
Mhm.
that exist in different temperatures of water.
That's a great question, and it would take a long time to answer it. There's some flies that are designed specifically for a species, that do exceptionally well for a particular species, but most flies can be attractive to a variety of species, the same fly. You might vary the size a little bit, you might vary some of the color if necessary, but this fly was attractive to trout, brown trout, rainbow, cutthroat, brook trout, or bull trout, and whitefish, and largemouth bass. Part of it is because it was fished as a dry fly or a floating fly, and the fish don't necessarily tell their buddies, hey, there goes the stone hopper. It's just something that has some resemblance to an adult aquatic insect that's on the surface. So it can take a lot of different shapes and so forth. The other thing is that I put a lot of stock in the movement of the fly. The length of the legs, the length of the tail, the movement of the wings. Those are the things that will attract as species, not a particular species, but predators of all kinds.
I see.
So those biological factors, the length of the things that move, will attract any kind of species to it. The study that was done on that animation thing was not species specific. As a matter of fact, they tested it on a variety of different kinds of fish, and every species proved to be exactly the same. The target was the movement of material.
We're not, I don't fish stoneflies down here, but we know that the stoneflies are there because we happen to do a stream quality water watch, and we find stonefly larvae all over the place. Okay, so this should work in the right season of the year, even down here, without any problems.
Well, it did. I field tested it in the spring here and early summer, and Brim even tried to hit it. Of course, they don't know any better, but it was effective here before I even took it to Montana.
The brim and the bass may think it's a little yellow grasshopper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are also a number of flies, one being the all favorite, the woolly booger.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody asks the big question, well, what's that imitating? You know, and the correct answer is whatever the fish want to eat that day.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so based on that, you know, the hopper pattern, the cap spider pattern, all of these have outriggers to them.
Yeah.
And when they're viewed from the bottom, okay, the fish says, this is a source that I can eat, and they'll take it. So warm water, cold water, if you look back at the floating patterns, the stimulators for trout, all of the lead pattern that you usually put a dropper in behind it, okay, they're all dependent on attention getting.
Yep.
And how many fish do you catch on that attention getter versus the tailing fly?
Dan, that's exactly right. One thing we discussed in class was that there's some species that, seagoing types of species. Sea trout is actually a brook trout that goes to the ocean. Sea run cuts cutthroat, steelhead, salmon, anything that's been in the salt. They live out there for 2 or 3 years after they were born in the fresh water. They go to the salt. They'll live out there and they eat protein, big prawn and squid. So when they come back to the same spot where they were born, when they come back to spawn, they're not looking for those little mayflies, those little caddisflies and tricos and such, RS2s. They're looking for, but they come back and they don't feed. It's hard to catch. They get pissed off because a fly is in their zone. They'll attack it. It's not because they're hungry. On other kinds of species, it's just like what Dan said. Something attracted them to it, and there is a resemblance to an aquatic insect. And the woolly booger, I think one of the things you have to learn about woolly boogers, for some reason, it's like a Hereford cow. You can dress it up and take it about anywhere, that go any place. But nobody likes to admit they've got woolly buggers in their fly box, because it's probably the first fly that anybody ever tied. They think it's too easy, it's too elementary. Well, you all know Johnny Martinez. When Johnny set his record at Lake Athens, I was talking to him, Johnny, what fly did you use? Well, I used a green out there. I said, whoa, back up, what? Tell me again. Green, he used a green woolly booger. He just didn't want to tell it. He didn't want to say the words.
Well, that, and there's, you get a fly that does have fairly universal for distribution for the species itself, but there are 660 some odd varieties of mayflies, many of which don't even vaguely resemble each other, other than the fact that they're a slim tapered abdomen fly, and they so everybody goes up and says, oh, gee, I've got these mayflies that work fine where I work, and wonder why the fish aren't buying it up here. It might just be that the mayfly up here doesn't remotely resemble that.
Well, let me tell you about this fly. This one, there's a little history to this one. And you'll notice it's got a glass bead on it. The man that invented it is Tim Wade at North Fork Angler Fly Shop in Cody, Wyoming. Right at the North Fork River runs through there. And his fly has a bead head. And I won't tie a weighted fly. I don't use weighted flies. But I will tie a bead head on there, because when a pupa or larva, when a pupa is ready to emerge, please study this. You know, when those bugs are ready to emerge, they're not coming up through your kitchen sink, or like the tank that Rex used to measure. There's current, and these bugs, when they begin to hatch, they tumble. They tumble. So I want my fly to look like and act like a natural, as much as it can. Now, I will put split shot on the line to get it down. Once the split shot's down there, that fly is free to move, just like a natural insect. So if it's going to tumble, it can still tumble. And that's what the fish are accustomed to seeing. So I don't use beads, I use a glass bubble. And the reason for the glass is that when that little pupa is ready to emerge, it actually generates a gas bubble in itself. And that gas, you can see it in pictures, the gas bubble is actually what lifts that little pupa up toward the water, the surface of the water. Remember, they don't go straight up because there's current moving them around, but some of those bugs are not good swimmers, but they still try to get to the surface. Anyway, I'm getting off. This is a North Fork special, and the way I came onto this fly, I was fishing in Montana, and fishing with a guy that had just been a guide at the North Fork Anglers. He had this fly on my line, and it was killing it. So I asked him, what was it? What is it? I hadn't seen it. What is that? It looked like a Prince nymph. He wouldn't tell me. Well, there's something to this. So later in the day, I asked him again. He wouldn't tell me. So a year later, I was talking to one of the other guides, and I said, hey, did you guys ever find out what the name of that fly is that Jeff used? They said, well, let me tell you the story. They actually got into his fly box and took all of his North Fork specials. And when he came back and picked up his fly box, hey, where are my North Fork specials? Well, then they knew the name of it. So they all started tying it. And this is a killer fly. If you're going to throw something like the stone hopper or any kind of a fly on top, stimulator, some of those great topwater flies. And you're going to have a dropper rig. You can go with an RS2, a chironomid, anything like that if you want to get down deep and hang your fly at the bottom of the river. But if you're trying to suspend your fly somewhere in the water column based on the hatch that's going on, that's why Prince Nymphs, gold-ripped hare's ears, the North Fork Special are so effective, because you can suspend it in the water column and it's really, really, really effective. So we put the bead head on there and lay a thread base to hold the bead head up there, wrap the thread back to the start of the bend. And what Tim Wade does, the guy that invented this fly, is he actually puts a little dubbing bump right there, because the next thing he's going to do is take two goose biots, and he wants to put that little bump on there so that when he ties the goose biots on, that bump is going to cause them to force them to spread out. Now you can tell on a biot that they have a natural curve to them. I hope you can see it has a little natural curve to it. So I'm going to take these two goose biots and I'm going to put them top to top so that they both have a curve going to the outside. And I'm going to lay these in here, and typically if I was just tying this fly I would do them one at a time, but for the sake of time I'm going to do both at the same time. I'm going to take these two biots and we'll lay them right where that thread bump is, and what I try to do is keep the butt end of the biot parallel to the hook shank, come back here to where that bump is, tighten it down. How's that, Rex? That'll be all right?
Oh, yeah.
Come up here, cut off the butt end. So the next thing on this fly, and I'm going to do it just like Tim does it. There's lots of variations out there on this one because it's so popular. I'm going to take some red wire and I'm going to take this red wire, I'm going to tie that in right where the base of those wings are, right there. Keeper. Now I'm going to take some dubbing, and for this fly I like super fine or fine dubbing. This one is actually something called fly dope. Believe it or not, it's fly dope, and it's made by Montana Fly Company. It's excellent dubbing for super fine kind of stuff. And think of dubbing as if instead of saying the word dubbing, you're saying wisping. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger and thumb and I'm just going to touch the tips. I'm just going to touch the tips of this dubbing. I'm not going to grab a chunk of it. And I'm just going to reach in here and just grab tips like this. And I think, well, I'm really not getting anything. And then I look at it and say, oh my gosh, look how much I've got. And the reason for that is that for most people, when you are dubbing a fly, you have way too much dubbing. So the theory is to take the amount of dubbing that you think is right and cut it in half and then apply it, because you probably started out with too much. Now you'll notice I leave a little space between the top of the dubbing and the hook shank. That's so that I can do a couple wraps of thread and get that exactly in the right spot so I can put that first wrap of dubbing right in place where I want it. And I'm going to tighten it all, and I put dubbing on just like we did with the peacock curl. I put it on in a clockwise manner because every wrap of thread that goes around there has a little clockwise twist. And that will tighten that dubbing down as it goes forward. Continue to go forward right up to about there. I'm going to take my wire. I'm going to get about 3 to 4 wraps of wire. End up in that same spot. Tie it off. Now, I'm going to take I'm going to take the black goose biots. I'm going to take one to start with. I'm going to turn it upside down with that curved portion down. I'm going to lay that right behind the bead. Well, Bill's here now, so let's start over. Oh, Bill, what did you do?
You're not supposed to tell them I'm sneaking in.
Okay, so we'll put that right there. Come on.
Now you're tying them like I do.
Pardon me?
You're tying them like I do now.
Yeah. Put that right there like that, and you can see from the side how that sticks up. I can straighten it just by pulling on the butt end, pulling it toward me a little bit, and that's nice and straight. I'm going to come back here and take another wisp of dubbing. Pinch it on there, no clumps of dubbing. That's the bane of dubbing, is no clumps. And I'm going to wrap some more dubbing on here. Cut off that butt end. Take one more. One more goose biot. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Once again, I'm going to lay this so that it's going to be tied in front of that dubbing loop I just did with some more dubbing. And that's in place. Get rid of the butt. I'm going to get two more white goose biots. And you can do these at the same time, but I'm not going to. I'm going to lay this goose biot right along parallel to the hook shank, hold it in place, right behind, tied in right behind the glass bead. Put the other one on the other side. Right there. Loose wrap, tighten, tighten. Pull the butt in, straighten it out, just like that. Do just a little bit, one little wisp. Cover that up. Cover, clean up on aisle 3. Now this fly is very, very buggy looking, and I tell you what, it is really effective. So if you're looking for something new to tie that's going to be effective, you might give this consideration.
This is called the North Fork.
North Fork Special, and it's you can, if you want to go to YouTube, and
No handouts?
you got here too late.
It's a secret.
You can go to YouTube and make sure you look at the Tim Wade YouTube, because he invented the fly, and it's you'll see some people attempt to tie this and they'll put 3. There's also a myth in fly tying that a stonefly has to have 3 wing cases. It's not always the case. There's Namora, there's a lot of species of the stone that don't have 3. But in any case, when he designed this fly, he designed it with 2 wing cases. So that is the North Fork Special with a glass bead, goose biot. Pretty simple. I think of it more of a guide fly because you can tie it pretty fast, and there's nothing really fancy about it. But I tell you what, if you get a few of those in your box and you fish them, you'll be tying some more. They're really good. Yes.
Primary color is black.
Yeah, Dan, when you go, if you Google North Fork Special, you'll see people that'll do a tan, you know, different colors, but I asked him one time if he tried other colors, he said, why? Black works. I said, all of his in his box are black, and all the North Forks in my box are black. And you know, he's the same white and buy it, no variation to this one. But I tend to go to original patterns anyway, it's kind of a curse. I encourage you to try this one, and like I said before, if you don't have any RS2s in your box, you need to get some of those, some chironomids, but if you're going to put a dropper that's going to suspend in the wing, in the water column as an emerging fly, this is one you definitely want to try. Okay, anything, any questions? Okay, we'll start over with the stone hopper again, now that Bill's here.
That sounds good.
What size is that?
Isn't that the one you taught me at Ducks Unlimited?
I don't think we tied the, did we tie it?
The yellow foam one?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the one you taught me.
make sure you, okay, take one of those with you before you go, Bill.
Dutch, thank you very much. That
You're
was
welcome.
great.
You're welcome.
Good job.
For those that are remote, we're going to take a break for an hour. For those that are local, there's no food right here. So we can either visit, or you can go to In-N-Out Burgers 2 minutes away, Burger Bueno's 2 minutes away, McDonald's is 2 minutes away. The bar restaurant here in the hotel is still
Sensing
closed.
a theme there.
No
Burger
smaller.
Bueno,
Yeah.
McDonald's.
So I'll leave the call open. We'll start back up again at 7 o'clock.
So that's, who's the stone fly?